So at the beginning of the year, I think Republicans believed the hype and the spin from the election that Trump had won a landslide, just as I think Democrats did too. And I feel like, Karen, it's something we dealt with years ago on LGBT issues. It's something I've dealt with so much. There exists a mindset on Capitol Hill, and actually just on Capitol Hill, not even inside the Beltway. The Beltway's bad enough. On Capitol Hill, this kind of conventional wisdom sets in. And I think for the past few months, Democrats and Republicans have been living in the world of what happened in November.
Hello, friends, and thank you for joining us on Charting the Way Forward, where we deliver research-informed strategy and intelligence from across the Democratic coalition. This podcast is produced by Way to Win. I'm your host, Kerry Eleveld, and today I'm joined by
Tory Gavito, president and co-founder of Way to Win.
Kristian Ramos, advisor to Way to Win and Valiente Action Fund.
All right, and today we've got a very special guest, host of State of the States on Sirius XM Progress, and one of my best buds dating back to LGBTQ activism in the Obama era, Joe Sudbay.
Thanks for having me. Thanks. It's great to be with all of you.
All right. So Joe and I, as I said, go back and we both sort of confronted to some extent the Obama administration, the Obama White House, as it was sort of sluggishly moving along on LGBTQ issues. Now, quaint. It seems quaint to think what our fight was back then versus what we're facing now. But anyway, all right. At the time of this recording on Tuesday, and you guys will be hearing this on Thursday, or that's when it drops. The markets, I was going to say, the markets are still convulsing in response to Donald Trump's tariff onslaught. That's what I wrote in the script. But out of the blue, the White House says, nope, just kidding. We're going to pause the tariffs for 90 days, and then, except for China. And then apparently the market just shot up, and I'm sure that Trump is busy taking some sort of victory lap for how he has, tanked the economy and then resurrected it at the same time. I don't know. I mean, there's still a ton of uncertainty, but we are facing tons of market uncertainty still. There's a 90-day reprieve. Who knows what side of the bed he's going to wake up on tomorrow. But the Republican Party is starting to see some cracks. I think that's part of. The White House is clearly getting a lot of pressure on on the tariff regime and the way it was really tanking the economies, starting to up prices, et cetera. Wall Street CEOs were starting to publicly talk about a possible recession. But that story isn't going away anytime soon. And we would like to return to a topic that flashed briefly last week, but was quickly sort of drummed out of the headlines by Trump's tariff meltdown. And that is what Democrats' overperformance in special elections thus far in 2025 could mean for 2026 and what it teaches us about Democratic campaigning. So I'm gonna tick through some of the 2025 history for you. You probably have heard about the Wisconsin, seat, the judgeship, the Supreme Court seat that we won last week, and you probably may have heard about the two special elections that Democrats did well in, even though they didn't flip in Florida, right? But let me just take you back to January, and so far there's been like around 16 or 17 special elections in 2025, and Democrats have overperformed in nearly every one of them. There have been two where we've underperformed slightly. But in January, we had two Virginia state legislature special elections where Democrats overperformed Kamala Harris's margin only by several points. And this was in the state Senate and House of Delegates. And Democrats managed to preserve their narrow majorities in both chambers because of those wins. And overperforming by a few points may not sound super notable, But the races were largely viewed as a test of Democratic resiliency after Trump's November win. And it was portrayed by the, media as an early test of can Democrats come back together, or are they just in full, death spiral mode? The New York Times featured a headline saying, "Did Trump drain Democrats' energy? These races will be the first test." Oof. So it was looking potentially bad. Who knows? It could have been horrible. It seemed like the press was almost like ready for that. But Democrats held strong and kind of put the kibosh on an electoral Democrats in the wilderness narrative at that point. Then came the first real shocker in late January. Iowa's 35th state Senate district, where Iowa Democrat Mike Zimmer, a construction company owner and former educator, flipped a seat that Trump had carried by 21 points last year. So Democrats also came very close to flipping a state House district that Trump had carried handily. They didn't quite do it, but they overperformed quite a bit in both of those elections. To date, those Iowa races represent Democrats' biggest overperformance, a roughly 25-point swing in both districts relative to Trump's November performance last year. So then we jump to March, and this was also a shocker. Pennsylvania's 36th state Senate district, which Trump won by 15 points in 2024 and 17 points in 2020. And now it is represented by a Democrat, James Andrew Malone, the former mayor of East Petersburg, who engineered a 16-point swing in Democrats' direction to flip the seat. That was a very, very red district. And the squeaker flip, which was just by about 480 votes, 482 votes, I think, shocked local analysts. And that brings us to the Wisconsin Supreme Court seat won by liberal Judge Susan Crawford last week, who defeated her conservative challenger by 10 points, which is a virtual rout in Wisconsin. It's a 50-50 state in terms of Democratic and Republican registration. So that's a huge margin to win by. So many interesting things to say about that race. Let me just say a couple. Crawford nearly matched the 11-point win that liberal Judge Janet Protasewicz notched in 2023. But that was a relatively low turnout election in 2023. Turnout last week was through the roof, 40% higher than the 2023 race. And in fact, Republicans hit all of their turnout marks. They were talking about what they were going to have to do in order to win that race. Wisconsin GOP Chair Brian Schimming said that conservative Judge Brad Schimmel, a lot of shims there, would win if 60% of Donald Trump's 2024 voters came out in support of him. Schimmel appears to have exceeded that by several points. It looks like he got like 63, 64% of Trump's turnout. He also ran nearly 250,000 votes better than the conservative candidate in 2023 did, the candidate who lost to liberal Judge Protasewicz. But according to Semaphor's David Weigel, Judge Crawford simply blew past him anyway, garnering about 280,000 votes more than Protasewicz in 2023. And Crawford's total vote also equaled about 78% of the ballots cast for Harris last year. I mean, that's just whopping turnout for a special election. Plus, voting shifted towards the Democratic-backed candidate in all 72 counties compared to the 2024 presidential election. At the same time, on the same night, Florida Democrats also had their moment last week, despite failing to flip two deep red congressional seats that Trump won by 30 plus points last November. Democrat Josh Weil in Florida's 6th congressional district shrank Trump's margin by 19 points, and Gabe Alamont in Florida's 1st congressional district, I'm having a lot of trouble today, shrank Trump's margins by over 17 points. So we've had nearly, like I said, nearly 17 special elections. Democrats have outperformed Harris in, I think 14 of those, something like that. And here's the thing, they have the average by which they've done that is more than 11 points. So they have a more than 11 point overperformance of Harris on average. And that's according to the data crunchers at the down ballot, formerly known as Daily Kos elections. Following last week's gains, Florida Democratic Party Chair Nikki Fried said that any Republican who won a seat where Trump won by 15 points or less should be scared for their reelection chances, quote unquote. So this leads to a whole slew of questions about why Democrats are winning. Is it just turnout advantage due to a base realignment where Democrats, benefit from higher turnout from higher propensity voters? Are we seeing the seeds of a broader anti-Trump backlash? And how are the candidates running? Are they running moderate? Is that really a thing, or are they not? And I think there's some conventional wisdom about that I'm not sure exactly holds. So we'll get into all that. But regardless of exactly what is happening, perception and perception on the Hill really matters. Because sometimes perception on the Hill doesn't actually match the reality, and sometimes it does. You never know. But I wanted to start with Kristian, who has, kind of his finger on the pulse of what's happening on the Hill. And I wanted to ask him, what are these special elections? Are they starting to like freak out Republicans a little bit on the Hill? What are you hearing?
So I think Republicans are starting to freak out on the Hill, but I don't think it's just because of the special elections. I think it's a combination of these things. And if we're going to look at it from a macro picture, I think what a lot of these guys are realizing is the narratives that they've been saying about the economy do not match with reality. And what I mean by that is let's just start with tariffs, right? The fascinating thing about this for me is a lot of these guys, the old school Republicans, were anti-tariff, would never do anything like what they're doing right now. And the reason is because it hurts their voters, right? They're trying to get exemptions in their states. And where is this hitting the worst? Places like Michigan, right? Cars that are made in America are not made with parts from America. They're made from parts all over the country, all over the world, right? So it costs more when you put these tariffs on these other countries to then build the car, to repair that car. So that actually increases costs. And then look at what happened in Ohio. You had a factory that Microsoft was going to build here that they are no longer going to build in America because of all of the economic uncertainty going on with all of these tariffs, right? So that's one piece. They see this stuff that's actually affecting their communities and their folks. And then I think the other thing that they're really grappling with right now is Medicaid. Tony Fabrizio, the Republican pollster for Donald Trump in 2024, just put out a poll that basically said that Trump voters are deeply opposed to cutting Medicaid, right? These are the voters in Florida, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, all of these really important states that are going to matter in 2026. Their voters do not want to see cuts in Medicaid. They don't want to see their prices raised. And the next thing that they're going to levy tariffs on is prescription drugs. And if I'm a member of Congress and I'm already talking about taking away people's Medicaid and I'm raising costs on tariffs, now we're going to go after people's prescription drug prices? Like that would make me very nervous if I was a frontline Republican elected official. And I think that is starting to dawn on people that the media narratives about all this stuff do not match the reality of what they are about to do, which is taking away health care from people to pay for tax cuts for billionaires, raising tariffs, which are going to raise costs for everybody, and trying to get exemptions for all this stuff. What's good for the rest of the country isn't good for them. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, so let me jump in here and toss to Joe, because Joe actually, he does the state of the states on Sirius XM Progress, and what is happening in the states oftentimes, and what local legislators are talking about in the states and voters are talking about the states often doesn't match what's actually happening or the conversation that's happening in Congress. So, Joe, from your perspective, do you think that, you know, are Republicans in Congress, I guess, and I wonder about Democrats too, but are they just starting to get a whiff of like what's really going on with their constituents, what's really going on in the states?
Yeah, I think actually, I think what's really interesting is for the special elections that you mentioned, the one in Iowa that Mike Zimmer won, the one that James Malone won, and the two in Florida, they were all vacant because Republicans were cocky. The Mike Zimmer left because the incumbent was picked by Governor Reynolds to be lieutenant governor. Um, James Malone's seat was vacant because the incumbent was picked by the new Republican senator to work for him. And then we know about the two members in Florida were picked by Donald Trump. So at the beginning of the year, I think Republicans believed the hype and the spin from the election that Trump had won a landslide, just as I think Democrats did too. And I feel like, Karen, it's something we dealt with years ago on LGBT issues. It's something I've dealt with so much. There exists a mindset on Capitol Hill, and actually just on Capitol Hill, not even inside the Beltway. The Beltway is bad enough. On Capitol Hill, this kind of conventional wisdom sets in. And I think for the past few months, Democrats and Republicans have been living in the world of what happened in November. I think Democrats overanalyzed it and came up with some reasons why they thought they lost, and they treated it like a massive loss, even though it was a very close election for president, very close in the House. And yeah, Republicans picked up seats in the Senate, but you know, it wasn't like what happened in 2008 with Barack Obama when he actually had a mandate. And I think there's been a lot of frustration amongst a lot of people with how Democrats on the Hill have been the lack of fight back. And then you have these elections out in, let's call it the real world, off Capitol Hill, that have just been really great. And you mentioned like the press coverage leading up to the Virginia special elections was just so aggravating. I actually got to talk to Ken Srinivasan, who won the state Senate seat. That election was January 7th, right in the middle of the holidays. And he told me, in the beginning, when the seats became vacant, that seat became vacant because the incumbent won a House seat, U.S. House seat. He said people were a little slow, but then all of a sudden they started cluing in and realizing it. And they delivered. They showed up. They overperformed. The one that was really interesting to me was what happened down in Senate District 10, where Jack Trammell lost, but he picked up 15 points. That was a big win. Even Dave Weigel, who you mentioned earlier, actually wrote the headline that should have been everywhere. GOP underperforms in first post-November test. He wrote that January 8th. But that should have started sending signals to Democrats on the Hill that maybe things were happening like they happened in 2017. It didn't because, conventional wisdom sets in up there and it is hard to break. The Mike Zimmer race was really interesting. First of all, just an amazingly wonderful man. I get to spend some time talking to him. And if you looked at, there was an article recently in Politico where the centrists in the Democratic Party were taking credit for these victories. And someone who used to work for Manchin said, you don't go talking about 2-3% of the population if you're going to win. And I thought, well, I wonder if you actually looked at Mike Zimmer's social media, because 2 days before the election, he was running on Iowa values. 2 days before the election, he had a post touting Iowa being the fifth state to pass anti-bullying laws to protect LGBT students, gay, based on sexual orientation and gender identity. His post the day before the election, was celebrating Iowa being the second state to allow same-sex marriage. Now, if you walked around Capitol Hill and were asking people about issues involving sexual orientation, gender identity, they would get the vapors. But here he was, and when I talked to him, he brought it up himself. He was an educator. He said, we had some kids who were dealing with gender identity issues. We created a new bathroom. We let them use the bathroom in the teacher's lounge. That was all. We solved the problem. And then it became this horrible issue in the State House. So, it's really interesting kind of how DC insiders interpret things through the lens they want to. And then you know, it just kind of sets in that things are happening in a certain way that don't match reality. Now, I think the way the elections have continued, and the James Malone election was really good too. Another really amazingly decent guy. Had a wonderful conversation with him on State of the States. Just really solid guy running for all the right reasons. And that's one thing I just want to add about people who run for state legislature. They're of their communities. They don't, you like, if you're out there knocking doors, you have to be authentic. You have to be real. You have to be able to tell people who you are. And people ask a lot of questions when you're knocking doors. But towards the end, he ran very hard against what Elon Musk was doing to his community. And that was I was that night I was watching those returns. I was I was so excited. And it really did kind of send shockwaves through, I think, Pennsylvania Republicans, but also Republicans around the country, because that is ancestral GOP territory. And then we saw what happened in Wisconsin the next week. So I kind of feel like if you're outside of DC, you're kind of addressing the issues that people are talking about, and you're coming at it in a different way and being really authentic about it. And you're not stuck in some mindset that consultants are telling you on the Hill, don't talk about this, don't talk about this. You better like lay low, stay calm, stay cool. Don't get out of your skis. I also hope that these events on April 5th shook people up on the Hill on the Democratic side as well, and realized, yes, what you've been thinking is happening outside of the Beltway is actually happening. We've seen it in town halls. We've seen it in special elections. We saw it 1,500 events around the country. And I just want to say this one thing. I went to the one in DC, right? And I think the four words I saw on most signs, I can swear on this, right? It's just, I'm
Yeah.
not swearing for the sake of swearing. I'm sharing. I'm going to say, were freedom, fight, fascism, and fuck. And DC is a pretty low-key town.
Right.
Those are the words on the signs, and I think it sent a that's the message I think that exists, outside of DC, and for the conversations I'm having, both with candidates on the show, but also I've been guest hosting a lot on SiriusXM over the past few weeks, and boy, our callers are just riled up about all of this.
Yeah. Hey, Tory, what are you getting a sense that, donors and some of the circles that you're sort of circulating in at this point, what's animating them? What are they picking up on?
It's a good question. I'm in DC this week.
Yeah.
And I'm here for the annual America Votes conference, which is like the big federal consortium of grassroots organizers who run big field programs in states every cycle. And before the event, there's always it's kind of like the Lollapalooza of democracy. There's always these side events, and different states host, brunches or cocktails. One time, Ben Wickler hosted like a North by Southwest thing. And I was like, don't take my South by Southwest. And it was like an Arizona, Wisconsin spotlight. Anyway, one of the tack-ons this week was actually hosted by the Patriotic Millionaires. And it's a partner outfit that organizes aligned rich folk who, it's in the name. They're the Patriotic Millionaires. They are saying, tax me. Like, I love America. I made money. I have money. I want the middle class to be strong. And one of the things that was interesting, I've been aware of their efforts for some time. I've been colleagues with Erica Payne, who's their president for some time. But this feels really of the moment right now to create a space for wealthy Americans who believe in democracy, believe in plurality, believe in taxation, to have a space to share that. And it was probably the most animated I've ever seen them. So I almost feel like I'm seeing what you mapped out, Kerry, in the opening, and Joe, what you're sharing. It's like when I'm in a bubble of like what's happening in philanthropy, I get a lot of doom and gloom and and I'm afraid and we're pausing. But then when I came here and saw a lot of like the real people, they're ready to fight. They want to fight too. And they're adding components into their agenda. It's not just tax me. because I believe that we should rebalance, the economy in this country so that there is a thriving middle class. They've added a component, and let's increase wages because it needs to happen on both fronts. So I don't know. I'm getting a lot of energy from the patriotic millionaires this week. I think that there's more alignment in this country than we think. And there's something that Joe was talking about the headline that should have been printed in January was GOP underperforming in first election. I keep thinking about the headlines that we are seeing that is this repeat of where's the resistance, and oh, where's the resources, and oh, where's the energy, and where's the fight. And it's like, who benefits from these headlines? What, anyone, we should all bring back like critical like media skills back into the classrooms. After we rebuild.
Tory, there's not going to be any classrooms, by the way.
We're going to have classrooms. We're going to have a Department of Education again. And when we do, we're going to teach kids critical thinking skills about how to consume media and question the source. And I just think we're in that moment where what our truth is telling us, like when we show up at the grocery store and we're hearing the conversation, like when I go to my kids' swim meets and I'm seeing families from across the center Texas, like not even Austin, like these are swim meets out in Killeen, in military base, like, and I'm hearing what families are talking about. Like my real life experience is telling me people are really scared right now and actually looking for leaders. That's why this, like, I'm kind of over this whole to moderate or not thing too. It's just like, it's not about ideology right now. It's about just who is a leader with a plan who can help me and who can I trust to do that. And so I'm seeing a lot of that energy, not just from like the town halls and the the PTA meetings, but also like right here in DC when the millionaires show up to party.
I did want to Tori inspired me. I've also been in DC this week having conversations with people, and what I keep telling people is he's only been president for 3 months, and people can't believe that, but it's true. He's only been president for 3 months, but the level of people that are pissed off right now, everywhere, people who don't care about politics, people who are at, when I take my daughter to McDonald's around you hear people talking about fucking tariffs. Like, I didn't have that on my bingo card in 2025. And so I do think it is real, right? Whether or not people here want to acknowledge that there's a real anger brewing out there in the electorate, I think it's real. And it's so funny because Tory's comment on the Department of Education. Did you guys remember the wave? That after school special where they were in the schools and do you remember this, Tory?
I don't remember. I'm older than you too,
No,
so
this was back in the day. This was anyway, but Joe, you remember it. Basically, it's this, they're at this school and the teacher comes in and he pretends like, do you want to explain it, Joe? Do you remember?
Go ahead. Go ahead. You go ahead.
I think you might be on your own here, Kristian.
Yeah, yes.
But we're into it. We're waiting.
I'm holding my breath, waiting for the punchline.
Basically, this teacher goes in and he starts teaching a class about Nazis, and he pretends like he's Hitler, and he gets all the kids to be Nazis, and then at the end of it, he shows Hitler is the real leader. I feel like that's where America is right now. Like we're living the wave where like 2 years from now, people are going to be like, whoa, what did just happen? And I see that revolt, that anger, I feel like it's like in this after school show, which nobody's seen apparently. So
that's all right.
I want to say like I do feel like that anger is real. And last week I spoke to the North Carolina House Democratic leader Robert Reeves, who's terrific. They fielded a full slate of candidates in 2024 with the hopes of breaking the GOP supermajority in the House, which they did, but also understanding that the more they did get out the vote around the state, the better it would be for the top of the ticket. And they had success everywhere except for Harrison Walz, governor, superintendent of education, lieutenant governor, attorney general, and Supreme Court judge, which is still being fought, even though she won. So I feel like
let's just be clear, where Republicans are trying to turn back the will of the people
yes.
and steal that seat from her. But anyway, please go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, but there's also like many of you know Daniel Nashinian, who runs Bolts. Last night he posted that in Rolla, Missouri. Now, I know of Rolla because I'm good friends with Robin Carnahan and her family has a farm there. And I know it's a farm because I hear farm stories from her all the time. There was Rolla had a group of city councilors who'd been pushing anti-LGBT policies, ban on drag shows, book censorship, all that kind of stuff. Last night, three of those city councilors running for election were defeated, and they were backed by they lost to candidates backed by the local LGBT group. So it's like what we're seeing at the state legislative level, members, congressional level, statewide, but also these races that aren't on a lot of people's radar screens, where people are fighting back against what's happening. And one of the things that I always hear, and I've talked to so many candidates, when they talk, I say, what do people talk to you on the doors? Because they knock doors. And I think that that's really just I'm married to a PhD, so he'll tell me that, well, that's data, but it's anecdotal. But after a while, it starts to add up. People want to talk about education. When they talk about education, they want to make sure their kids are safe at school and not getting shot. They want to make sure their teachers are well paid and the kids get a good education. No one ever brings up these superfluous issues. They bring up housing costs. They bring up the ability to protect healthcare, including abortion rights. Those are the things people want to talk about. And I kind of feel like somewhere between those conversations and Capitol Hill, there's a disconnect. There was a meeting a couple of weeks ago out in Loudoun County with a bunch of moderates who are trying to change the party and don't want people to fill out questionnaires and want to discontinue small dollar donors, which makes no sense to me. And they talked about going to real communities to talk to people. And I'm like, geez, just imagine this. Imagine in every state there was a mini version of what exists in Congress. Let's call them state legislatures, where there are Democrats who represent urban, suburban, and rural districts. There are town councils, city councils around the country. There are people doing this, and these are people who don't filter their thinking through consultants and having people tell them, well, this poll and this focus group. These are people who knock doors and know their constituents. That's what Leader Reeves told me last week. He said, when I go to the grocery store, people come up to me and want to talk about issues, and I know he was talking about all the people in his neighborhood who lost their jobs. One of his constituents lost her job. She does medical research to prevent cancer, and she got fired from the federal government. So I feel like those kind of conversations happening outside of DC, and some of it has shown up in town halls, which is really important. But I kind of feel like it still hasn't permeated the DC bubble. The Capitol Hill bubble. I want to call it the Capitol Hill bubble because I think that's different than other parts of the city, as Tory explained.
Fair point.
Joe,
Fair point.
are you in DC or where are you?
Yeah, I'm in DC right now. Yeah.
So what was fascinating about you saying that is I'm in the suburbs, right? I'm in Silver Spring, and I can't tell you, I go to social parties, for my kid, and like half the people that are there, like have been fired,
Yeah.
or like worried about their jobs. It happens like I'll pick up my
Crazy.
kid, and I have a friend who's like, there's a dad who's there who works at the Department of Education, and he's like, every day he's like, yeah, I'm still here, still here. And I was like, so I feel like it is it is impossible in DC not to experience the Doge stuff, to experience the general. As somebody who lived through 2016, it's totally different in that regard.
Yeah.
Right.
There are very real casualties and life-changing things for a lot of folks.
Yes. Yeah.
Let me interject here and ask something that I've seen in some, several different headlines and whatever, which is, are Democrats poised to have their Tea Party moment? And maybe that's not the best comparison. Like, there's a piece of me that inherently wants to push that comparison away. But the idea is that, the grassroots and the voters and whatever are saying, look, the Democratic Party might in DC in particular might just not be meeting the moment. And, you see some of the candidates who are coming out now. Like, I was just looking at Democrat Mike Sachs, who just launched in New York 17. It's the Hudson Valley region, Putnam County, right? I think. So anyway, and he's trying to unseat a Republican, Mike Lawler. So this isn't like a primary situation. But the launch of his ad is called, quote unquote, Unfuck Our Country. Like, that was his launch ad, Unfuck Our Country. Now, the F-U-C-K, the U is an asterisk, but it is like, it's very in your face, right? And then there's Mallory McMurrow, who launched last week to replace Democratic Senator Gary Peters of Michigan, who's retiring, right? And she's openly calling for leadership change in the Senate. I mean, it's not her main rallying cry. She had already said she thought Chuck Schumer should go, I think, at one point, but she was asked point blank on an interview that I heard last week, are you still calling for, leadership change in the Senate? And she was like, yes, I'm still calling for that. So, like, are we having a Tea Party moment? Is this what's going to happen? Is that people are going to, I mean, leadership abhors a vacuum. And I feel like there is a bit of a vacuum in what's happening now.
You think? Yeah.
Yeah.
Can I just jump in with a concept and have Joe and Kristian riff a little bit on this question of the Tea Party? It's like, it appears to me that there are at least three strands of the Democrats right now in motion. There's the technocratic strand, and it is not lost on me that Ezra Klein is launching his book tour on the West Coast around the abundance agenda, which is frankly another like candy wrapper around deregulate, let capital flourish. It's kind of an old Milton Friedman model, but it's got a new name, abundance agenda. And then at the same time that you've got Bernie and AOC on the oligarchy tour or the anti-oligarchy tour with thousands of people. So that those two represent some pretty clear strands to me of the technocratic strand and the populist strand. And then there's the like inside party strand, the Schumers, even to a certain extent, the Carvilles, like the old school folks that have been in the party and running campaigns. And I think that like it's clear that the Democrats themselves, the electeds and those running, are attempting to figure out the relationship to these strands. And Mallory is an interesting example of the one who's, I think, coming across very clearly as, I'm going to stand in my value and show you I'm going to fight. And I'm going to tell you, yeah, I fought for trans kids. Come at me with that. I'm going to tell you, yeah, I think that there's a leadership shift that needs to happen in DC. I mean, there's folks who are just older. It's time, like I'm going to tell you, yeah, maybe we need to think about what regulations are serving us and what aren't for us to be able to build new things for people that people like. I'm going to tell you about. So she's an interesting character in how she's like rolling in that trio of strands. But I don't know, because I don't know that, because the strands are so divided right now, like it does not appear to me that there is a consensus being built between the technocratic strand and the populist strand to find common cause to win together, which is, I think, kind of how we have to do it. And like, it's not like the populist strand can be so easily co-opted by our business class the way the Tea Party can, because their interests are kind of aligned in their end game. So it just feels a little different.
Yeah, those are interesting strands, and I feel like that technocratic strand. I feel like it's a conversation that happens among elites. I'm just going to say it happens among elites, right? It's like, I've known Ezra Klein and Matt Iglesias. They used to be at Center for American Progress. I never read them. I don't get them. I'm just going to be honest about it. But there's like this audience that they have of people, and it's, they're the smart guys. And look, Ezra Klein did it for me a couple of years ago when he sat down with Paul Wright, and they were going to have a really smart conversation because they're the smart guys. Okay, have your conversations. But how does it relate to real people's lives? I think that other strand, that older strand, look, James Carville last won an election in 1992, but he stuck around, and there's a crew of Democrats that love him. God love him. He did his job, whatever. But I just don't feel like they fight. Like, and that is like Schumer's actually said repeatedly, we don't understand this social media thing. Makes my head explode. 20 years ago when I was writing on a blog, Harry Reid, who was no spring chicken, set up a war room. And then one of the first elected officials who ever invited bloggers in was Harry Reid. because they knew things had to be done differently. And I kind of feel like both of those strands still live in that, like, oh, get something in the New York Times. Ezra's writing in the New York Times or whatever. And I think a lot of people don't get their news that way. And I think one of the things I think that distinguishes all of them is the group that wants to fight. The AOC and Bernie, they want to fight. There's a group of Democrats on the Hill who show the fight. Maxwell Frost, Jasmine Crocker, Robert Garcia. They are out there fighting every day and trying to inspire us. And I see that in state legislators too. They are out there. Look at the attorneys general. Attorneys general around this country have been unrelenting in going after Trump and his administration. And shout out to Janet Mills taking on Trump in his own house. So I kind of feel like, really, to me, the big distinction is those who really want to fight and fight the war we're in and understand we can get to a better place. That's kind of how I see the distinction right now.
I'm just going to say Janet Mills is the governor of Maine and went to the White House and called out Trump on his anti-trans BS. I just wanted to throw that in.
And I'm a Mainer, so I'm very proud. I was very proud of.
Real quick.
Yeah.
I want to respond to Joe because it's so funny. I worked in the war room, Joe, that you're referring to. And I don't know if it was Ari who brought you in or Merched, but I worked there.
Yeah.
What is fascinating about this, I was gonna thread this needle anyway, but I worked in the Senate and I've worked in the House, right? And I've worked for a mayor. And when I worked for Harry Reid was back when he was doing your war. I don't think it was 20 years ago. I hope it wasn't 20 years ago, but that's when I was
2005
there.
was the first time I met with him was 2005.
So I was probably there 2000. It doesn't matter. But the point I'm trying to make is where we were then versus where we are now is completely different. The party is, whether or not people want to like admit it, or we're more to the left. We just are. From 2005, 2006, that has been the trajectory of what is and isn't progressive. And I hate these labels. I hate these terms because I can never.
When you say we're more to the left, who is the we? You're talking about the electorate themselves?
Both. That's what I'm trying to say. Like the Democratic Party and the electorate. And I think like it has become more progressive than when I was there. There's no question. When I was in the House, same deal, right? I remember sitting and watching Bernie Sanders give floor speeches to an empty Senate for hours at a time. And he was saying the exact same fucking thing then that he's saying now.
F-bomb podcast we've ever done, Kerry.
Well, I'm just saying, like, so it's fascinating to me because the other side of it is my dad, who is not anybody's idea of, I wouldn't call him, I would say he's a moderate, right? He's a Democrat, but he's definitely, he's from a different generation. The other day I had a phone call with him and he was like, fuck the moderates. I'm sick of it. When are they going to fight? When are they going to fight? I'm getting killed out here and nobody's fighting for me. So yeah, you know what? We need a little fight right now. And so that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't know if that's a Tea Party thing or what, but the shift from 2008 to now is real in the electorate. And I would argue within the Democratic Party because the energy is within the more.
But I guess this is what I'm trying to say about I agree with you, Joe, that like, honestly, I'm only hearing about the Ezra Klein stuff when I'm in the Patriotic Millionaires room. I'm not hearing about it when we're in the focus groups with,
Right.
the folks that voted last cycle. So, or didn't vote last cycle. But in any case, but we have to understand what resources were put into play to allow the Tea Party to flourish. Some of it's natural energy, but it is also funded. And there is like funding infrastructure that lets it like keep getting broader and more strategic. And there is not alignment of major donor money behind fueling the populist wins that we're seeing right now in the energy this year. Now, there was in 2016, 2017, 2018. There was a lot more money that was going to movement and resistance work. It is shifting, but it also makes you wonder, like, why? And then it reminds you of the beauty and the power of the grassroots fundraising operation, like why we have Act Blues, because it's the candidates that don't have to sit in salons with millionaires and billionaires that can just like, get $20 checks on Act Blue at scale that are allowed to be the clearest fighters right now. And so I mean, it's almost like you've got the elite parts of our party trying to knock out the legs of the stool that would allow for that kind of the populist waves to take a little bit more power. I mean,
That's
there
that's
is a
that's what
yeah,
I
go
meant by
ahead,
when,
Jen.
like, who thinks it's a good idea to end to get rid of small dollar donors? Like, what in what world?
And
Like, who?
let's just be really clear that that Third Way is
Yeah,
promoting this idea of we should separate out small dollar donors. They shouldn't be, we have to diminish the power of small dollar donors, which by the way has given Democrats their biggest advantage in fundraising really ever. So anyway, but sorry, go ahead,
Real
Joe.
quick, I just want to put a quick button on this.
Yeah.
Where I was going with my original comment was fascinating to me is I started with a story about Bernie in the empty Senate chamber. That guy's the most popular politician in the country right now.
Yes.
Not in the Democratic Party, in the country. And I think
Yes.
number two is AOC. And then, Donald Trump is like way at the bottom, and then, the rest of the Democratic establishment way at the bottom. That to me, if I could go back in a time machine 20 years and you say this guy is going to be the fucking most popular politician in the country, I would be like, I don't know. But
yeah.
here we are. So that is something. That is a real thing, I believe.
Well, there's one example I just want to throw out of someone who has really, like, Ruben Gallego. I know so many people who know him from Arizona who were so excited when he ran, and he ran, and he had lists like Merced actually saved the Merced Zahid, who's a friend. Uh, saved all his emails. I'm not going to be cinema. 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 The weekend that Bernie and AOC were in Tucson with 23,000 people, he was in Sedona with Mark Andreessen, that venture capitalist, whatever he is, who's best friends with Trump and Musk, and Matt Iglesias. And I don't know what happens. Somehow he went from, pretty, very progressive. He gets in the Senate, and there's something that happens to sometimes. I don't know who the consultants are. They get a hold of these people. Same thing happened to Jared Golden from Maine. When Jared Golden was running in 2018, he was progressive. There was an article in the Times about how he was Medicare for all. He was going to fight for workers. It was like, and everyone I knew in Maine thought he was great. He won. The first press release I saw for him, he voted against a gun bill, which, okay, he's from Northern Maine, but he used NRA language, and it was like racist language. And, there's conversation today, is he going to vote against the SAVE Act? I mean, I don't know what happens to these, there's mostly guys that they get into DC and somehow they're like, this is how you must be. Be who you were, be authentic, and fight for your constituents. How hard is that?
Yeah. Let me just ask everybody, because we're coming up to the top of the hour. Can everybody give me 10 more minutes or no?
Oh, yeah. You know me, Kerry. I can talk nonstop.
Tori, if you have to drop, you can drop. Feel free. We can no.
I have
You're good?
yeah.
Okay. Because there has been a real, this idea that there's been an explicit effort to cut, like Tori said, to cut the stool, the legs out from under the stool is real. And there has been, as we've been doing well in these special elections, there's been a real effort to paint everyone who's run in those special elections, all the candidates, as having run as moderates. And I am here to tell you that I just don't think that's actually true. I mean, I think that Joe might have more to share on this. He did talk about the Iowa the guy who what was his name? Mike Zimmer, I think.
Mike Zimmer,
Yeah,
yeah.
who actually was tweeting out things about Iowa being the third state to legalize same-sex marriage and anti-bullying, passing an anti-bullying bill. I just want to read you something too. There was Josh Weil, who was one of these Florida congressional candidates, Democrat, right? Who ran 16 points better than Harris. And I'm not picking on Harris. I'm just saying that he overperformed by quite a bit. And he's a public school teacher. And here's what he told Politico ahead of the election. And he said that he thought progressive messaging had actually helped him, including, heavily campaigning on Medicare for all. And he said to Politico, it's a popular talking point with it's popular talking point with veterans. It's a popular talking point with everyone. No one loves their health insurance company. No one, not Republicans, not Democrats. And then he said, trying to sell Republicans on a Democrat that's Republican light is never going to work. So he ran a very populist campaign. He was progressive. He overperformed. I think this idea, after every win, it's like, if only we pick moderates, we're going to win. Are these people running as moderates? I haven't seen evidence of that for the most part.
I don't think they're running as well. I think they're running as authentically
Humans.
themselves, right? As human, yeah, yeah. You know, when I talked to Mike Zimmer, and he talks about his community. He loves his community. He taught there. He has a business there. Same thing with James Malone. They're like, and Josh Wild was fueled by small dollar donors because people want to fight, right? Which goes to that issue too. And I haven't seen people hold their punches. I mean, they are who they are. And again, there's something about people knocking doors. First of all, you have to be sort of brave, and you make yourself very vulnerable when you knock on doors in your community and you're running for an office, especially, early, like in January, when everyone was thinking Trump is omnipotent. And they were just honest about who they are. And I think that authenticity thing is such a key factor, because if you're trying to be, moderate, and because if it's not who you are, you start using the talking points and you don't sound real. And I think that's a big part of it. And people they want to know. They may not agree with you all the time, but they want to know you're not bullshitting them, and they want to know you're going to fight for them. And I think that's really important. And I really wish that would permeate the Democratic DC consulting establishment.
It's interesting. Nobody's gonna like this. This is gonna be a very unpopular take, but this is one of the truisms that I've encountered in politics. And somebody told me very early on that I thought was stupid and wasn't true. Somebody said, what's the number one thing that all politicians have to do? And I was like, I don't know. And he said, get reelected. That's it. Really, at the end of the day, it comes down to getting reelected. And so, like this frame of like moderate progressive, like if you're unelected and you're out there knocking the doors and you're trying to get those dollars, you're gonna do whatever it takes to get elected. It is the hardest thing. I liken it to getting kicked in the nuts all day, really, when you're running for office. And these electeds, that's how they think. They're not thinking like moderate progressive. They're like, I got to get this much vote over here. I got to get that much vote over there. And this is what I got to do for this constituency. And it's not beautiful. It's not great. But that is, I think, what happens with a lot of these electeds in this process. There is obviously a better way of doing it. Of course.
If what you say is really true, we are going to have a Tea Party moment, because no one is going to think that's acceptable, for reals. And I have to say
Hold on. But if it is a Tea Party moment, it will be people being responsive to their constituents, is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's true.
That's back at the squad. I mean, isn't that sort of the lesson between like AOC and Bowman, for example, where like AOC hands out the backpacks at school time or what, like back to school time. Like she does constituent services, and it's not clear that Bowman was really doing the work at home. And so, yeah.
Well, my point where I was going was exactly what you're saying, is that people will be responsive to their constituents. If that's where their constituents are, and that's where, people truly want to push them that way, or they'll lose, right? If they're not responsive to what's going on, then they're going to lose their elections. That's where I was taking all of this.
Well, I think a good example, someone mentioned Mike Sachs today, and his video is great. And it starts with Mike Lawler. He starts with a clip of Mike Lawler, who's the incumbent Republican, who you can turn on MSNBC or CNN almost any day, and that guy will be there because they view him as a moderate. And Mike Sachs said he talks like a moderate, up here and down in DC, he votes with Republicans all the way. And a good example is Representative Tony Gonzalez from Florida. A couple of weeks ago, got all kinds of media. He's got a letter together with 5 other members who represent heavily Latino districts. We're going to fight for Medicaid. What did they do? They voted for the budget resolution. Last week, Gonzalez had a meeting, big press release. I'm fighting for Medicaid. He's going to vote for the budget resolution again. So that's another part of it is, when you can make sure people understand, they say one thing to you here and then they go to DC and do another. That pisses people off too. And you've got to be able to call them out, and you can't do the same thing.
It's interesting because I'll give another example of exactly what he's talking about. One thing that I saw, and I'm not going to name names, but there was a candidate that was running last cycle, and they were trying to sort of run Republican light in a district against somebody who had done that, the same way. And we had conversation, like, you're running MAGA light and you're not really distinguishing yourself from this other candidate. And, the constituents let them know, right? They weren't looking for that. And they were looking for something else. And
That description, I know you're talking about any of the Texans that ran last cycle.
I didn't say anything.
Okay.
But that's my point. It's like,
I don't know exactly who you're
natural
talking
selection.
about. I honestly don't know exactly who we're
Sounds
talking
like a
about.
Texas Democrat.
I don't know. No, I'm not.
Right.
I didn't say anything.
All right. Let me just say this as long as we've brought up Texas, and Tory's an expert in Texas among many other things she's expert in. Do you think, and this may be our last question here, do you think that, Colin Allred ran as a moderate for the most part. How do you think that played?
I think that Beto O'Rourke ran against Ted Cruz in 2018 and lost by 3 points. Yes, he had the wind in his sails. It was the the first backlash to the Trump era. Fast forward, you have Colin Allred losing by over 11 points. Not all of that can be wind, right? Like he was running in a headwind. I will give him maybe 3 points down for that. But then that should have been not an 11-point race. And it was very much the tale of two different candidates. Like Beto is all field, all grassroots organizing. He'll go into red counties he has no business going into and pulling out reverse polarization and knocking out his numbers from the blue counties. Like it's a little bit wild. Like Beto's a little wild that way in the field program. Colin was all buttoned up, disciplined, direct mail and TV ads, very traditional. And he spent something between 70 and 90 million dollars. Like I've seen different estimates, but it was definitely a nice bit of coin. And his name ID is barely tweaked up. Like after this $70 million, $90 spend, people still can't quite recall his name. So there's something happening with Colin that is not just, I faced headwinds. It's not just like, you gotta, and I'm not going to say it's too moderate or to this. He's not distinguishing himself. That's certainly true. Like if you run MAGA Light, what we're really saying is you're not distinguishing what you're going to fight for Texans. So he's not distinguishing himself. And then he really doesn't understand the attention economy, like of media, where if you're going to have that much money, he's a football player. Like he should be doing weird and wild things in addition to TV ads, right? Like I want to see his fitness workout videos right now. Like,
Right.
I want the Colin fitness regime. I will start following him and doing a plank challenge every day with him. Like he needs to get a little bit into that culture social media space.
I wish you had been running that campaign. It would have been a lot more interesting, Tory, I have to tell you. But Joe, do you want to just, yeah. You get last word.
This is something I think, and of course I want to call an Allred to, and I loathe Ted Cruz. And this was after the Cancun thing too. Okay. But I do think in some cases what happens, and this happened in Maine in 2020, like there are a few politicians I loathe more than Susan Collins. Like I just can't stand her. I wanted Sarah Gideon to win. And early on, I remember I was in Maine in 2019. I was having lunch with some people, and I was introduced to this woman who'd come up from Washington because the DSCC was going to run Sarah Gideon's campaign. And I said to the people sitting around the table, that's going to be a problem because in Maine, you have to run a campaign for Maine. Susan Collins knows how to run a campaign for Maine. And I think sometimes there's a DC mindset and they think they can come in and it's almost a cookie cutter, but you can't let the outside consultants tell you how to run an in-state campaign. You have to let the in-state people do it. And it's been something I've been pissed off about for years. And I don't know if that's what happened in Colin Allred's case, but sometimes when the DSCC gets their claws into people, they tone them down. They put them through the high pressure car wash. And we don't need candidates who went through a high pressure car wash. We need the football player to do what he can do. That's just a point I always make.
Okay, I'm going to leave folks with two. We had that very local thing, that very local ending. I'm going to leave folks with two things to think about that have occurred to me. One is that as I was listening to Mallory Murrow, she said that she's been thinking. She heard someone ask, "What goes on your hat?" Like Trump has a "Make America Great Again" hat. What goes on your hat, right? So she said, "I've been thinking a lot about that." I'm not going to tell you her answer. You have to go look for it. I don't remember it totally, but I'm just throwing this out there. Can you really see hats like blue hats with like abundance on them? Is that like a real thing? I'm just saying like that. This is a phenomenon. Everyone's talking about abundance. I cannot tell you if you haven't spent time just listening, dedicated in mainstreaming as Recline, like you have no idea what that means. And I don't think grassroots voters are going to know what that means. And I think it's going to take a lot of explanation. And I cannot see the abundance hat really taking off. So anyway, I'm going to say that. I'm going to get a lot of arrows for that, I think. Kristian,
I
did you?
would say that before I worked at Way to Win, I never listened to Ezra Klein or knew David Shorwell. So
Okay.
very
All
proud
right.
to do that.
All right. So
Man,
I'm not,
proud of-
listen, I'm not saying Ezra Klein's a bad guy. I'm just saying I do not, the abundance agenda, cannot get it.
Albondigas. That makes a better hat.
Are we doing
Meatballs. Meatballs for all.
Meatballs.
Are we doing the three media things for Joel? Did we want to do that, Kerry?
Oh no, so okay, sorry. Okay, we can do it. I've typically been thinking about doing it for people who I'm doing one-on-ones with. But Joe, give us a couple of media things that that you've been intaking, like things that you're listening to, reading, following on the social medias, whatever. Wait, can you give me three quick ones as a lightning round?
I love the down ballot, both the podcast and their interpretation of elections. I think it's just vital if you're trying to figure out what's going on. I have found Josh Marshall to be incredibly insightful. A talking points memo. I've always liked Josh. I think he has just been amazing these past few months, even more so. And then, three. I'm gonna say, you know who else I like too is Greg Sargent at the New Republic. I'm so glad Greg's at the New Republic now. I think he's more free and he's been much more aggressive. And the thing about what I think it's interesting about all those three, people in media follow them. Like the down ballot gets quoted all the time for their analysis of special elections. I think a lot of Josh has a very influential audience, and I know people on the Hill listen to Greg. So I hate to pick three white guys right now because I listen to so many things, and of course this podcast. But I think those are three media outlets that I have really become reliant on.
All right.
All right.
Everybody go watch The Wave. That's one. I'm just putting it back up. Full circle moment. The Wave. It's on YouTube. It's like 46 minutes.
Soon.
All right.
I'm gonna stick with White Lotus.
White Lotus. Okay. I'm a parent, so I don't get to watch anything or listen to anything. Nothing for me.
Well,
Anyway,
the thing we watch is RuPaul's Drag Race. That I'm going to tell you, we're getting
There you
close to
go.
the end of season 17. I have my favorites, but just leave it at that.
there you go. There you go. Okay, so my real passion is keeping track of Michigan college football and college basketball, women's, men's, the college sports out of Michigan is like that's my happy place. But all right, so right, yeah, I'm the lesbian in the crew, and I'm gonna pull out the college sports reference. So that's it for us.
U of H till the very end too. I was doing some March Madness.
There you go. There you go. You guys were in it till the end. That was a big run.
So
All right.
Kid Cruz showed up.
Yeah.
Cruise curse.
Cruz
All
curse.
right. Oh, the cruise curse, man, that'll do it every time. All right, I think we're going to leave it there on the cruise curse. Thank you, Joe Sudbay, host of Sirius XM Progress's State of the State series, for joining us today. Where can people find you? You have Blue Sky, right?
I'm on Blue Sky, Joe Sudbay. Yeah, that's right. That's where I do most of my rantings. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So follow him there. And I also want to thank, of course, our listeners. We appreciate you and your dedication to the work of rebuilding our democracy, which at its core is about building coalitions and common cause across groups with different backgrounds and lived experiences. We continue to encourage people to stay engaged locally, make new connections, join new local groups, start a weekly dinner, whatever fosters connection for you. It's just so important in this moment. Things are getting grim in many ways, and you need to have a support system that's local. It is a legitimate form of resistance to simply be upping your local game. Also, if you appreciate what we're doing, please go to our podcast, go to Charting the Way Forward, follow us, rate and review us. Tell your friends about us, and also check out our Substack. We're going to have something new, I think, this week on our Substack. We will certainly be putting it out on Blue Sky. That's super helpful to us. And with that, we will see you next Thursday. Until then, do good, be well, hug your loved ones, and tell your dog and Kristian's dog that I say hi.